right
Yeah,
now.
yeah.
Yeah.
Good. Then, welcome to POC Stories. Today I'm hosting Emily, and we are talking about transracial adoption because I'm very interested in this topic. And yeah, so I'll let you introducing yourself.
Awesome. So I'm Emily, and I actually met Isa actually just by living in Berlin. And I did see her POC Stories page, so I decided to follow her. And her content also has a lot to do with my content on my YouTube channel. So I actually already did an interview with her. And I guess more just in general about me, I am from the United States. So I was adopted from China when I was 16 months old, and I believe from Guangzhou province, so that's kind of in southern China. And ever since then, I became a US citizen when I was 3, actually, so I don't remember it at all. But after I was adopted at 16 months, I was brought to Arkansas, if you guys know where that is, really in the south of the US, but that's where I've stayed for all of my life until I decided to go abroad. Yeah.
Okay. And so where did you live then? Only in Berlin, or did you live also in other places?
So I lived in Arkansas until I went to college, and I actually got the opportunity to study in Italy for about a semester, and then Germany, Dortmund, Germany for about a year. And then I finished my bachelor, and then I went to Berlin for about a year, so last year.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so since 3 years old, you've been to the United States, right?
So I became a U.S. citizen when I was 3, but I've been in the U.S. ever since I was like before 2 years old. So when I was 16 months old.
Okay. So then, did your parents were open-minded to your adoption status because you were so young? That because I feel like some parents who adopt young children, they don't talk about it because they're so young, so they cannot remember, and they feel sometimes it's not so important to
Hmm.
like address right now. But was it your case in your family, or they were open about it?
Yeah, I think so. I was adopted by a single mom, and she was always super open about it. And it was just I do have a book, but it's called like I Love You Like Crazy Cakes is actually the title of it's a kid's book, but it's actually intended for adoptees, because there were, I mean, thousands of like little girls from China, like in the 90s, who were adopted. So I think that that book was for us as kids to really understand, okay, like this is why you were adopted, what is adoption, and why did your birth parents do that? What did your, you know, adoptive family think of that now? So we always read that when I was little, and ever since it was just a fact that I was adopted, but it didn't really make me feel different from kids who weren't adopted at all. Yeah.
Okay. And when you were like a kid, like how how people like react in schooling when you were saying, for example, to your friends or whatever, oh, I'm adopted. So how they were reacting?
So adoption has never really been like a big part of my identity, I would say, which
Mhm.
is why I really didn't talk about it. Not because I didn't want to, but it's just because no one really asked me, and I just felt like a normal kid. It was more, I guess, in after college that that side of me really kind of began to grow, I guess, just because there is a lot of complications and really tragedy in a lot of aspects with that comes with adoption, depending on when you were adopted. And I think I've come to realize that it shaped me, whether I like it or not, a lot more than I initially thought it did for all of my childhood. But the only thing that I would get maybe from grade school kids would be like, oh, like, is that your grandma? But I actually never got any sort of like, why is she white and why are you Asian? Like, why do you like look different? So I actually never got any of that. So that was really nice.
Okay. And so, in what kind of environment did you grow up? Did you grow up in a white environment or more like mixed or?
Yeah, so it was definitely all white. And I think that, I mean, there was a little bit more diversity, I guess, in school, but it was, I mean, most of my friends were white, and you know, all of my family's white. So yeah, definitely in that sphere.
Okay. So, as you growing up like in a white environment, so you were thinking that you're white, or you were aware of your Asianness.
Yeah, so I think that I was maybe that's interesting because I have to really reflect on that because, especially at this age, because I think that even though I said that, you know, adoption wasn't like a super big part of my identity, and no one really asked about it, which was fine with me back then, um, there were definitely patterns that I noticed that was caused because of lack of representation, whether that be in the community or on TV in the US. So it definitely influenced me, but I couldn't put that into words like I can now. But I guess, yeah, I don't know. I think that maybe I secretly wanted to have like those traits of white people, basically, because that's what I always only saw on the TV. That's what I saw within my own family. That's what I saw with the really popular girls at my school who were all white. They were all blonde, and they got the most attention. So I don't think that I initially consciously linked that with race in my mind. But it definitely did influence me in that way, just to make me feel super bad about myself. So, you know, yeah, and I think that I do still feel more comfortable with white people. I don't know. And I don't want to say like, oh, I don't feel comfortable with anyone else. Um, I do, and I really like to discover other people, whatever race they are. But I think that just having grown up until I guess even, yeah, up until college, really was when I was more with almost always white people. So I think that for me, it wasn't anything that I tried to that I linked with race, but it definitely did influence me. Now that I think about it.
Okay.
Mm.
So, so in this mindset, could you like were you aware about anti-Asian and sentiment, and did you experience it, or for you it was something not really part of your daily life?
So there were very casual things said, and at this age, I would definitely see how those would be like microaggressions. But of course, I never had heard of that word until I went to college, and um, especially because I couldn't really put my race and what it means to have to look like something else that you can't control. I couldn't put that into words, so I didn't know what to call that. But there would be just comments like, "Oh, like she's smart," just assuming. There would be like, "Oh, like I thought you were Korean instead of Chinese," something like that. I've heard a few times there would be. I was dating this one guy who was also white. He also had a lot of white friends, and they used to call me chink, and I did not understand. Yeah, I didn't
Hmm.
understand the severity of that word, and so I think also as just a person of color, it just feels more. Obviously, it's not comforting, but that it makes everyone feel better when you don't say anything about it and you kind of just like laugh it off. So um, that's mostly what I did in that situation. And that really happened when I started dating that one guy. Not really sure why I didn't say anything. Obviously, no one was educated about this back in what 2000, between 2011 and 2015 in the U.S. But yeah, so those kinds of things, and it just makes me really sad as well. I mean, I know the mentality that I was in, but it still makes me feel really sad because it's like, well, if you keep on letting that happen, then it's just going to keep on going, and they're going to do that to someone else. So it was really hard. Um, and then yeah, but other than that, and I think especially when I was really young, I don't think that I had a ton of that. I definitely feel like I had a lot less of that going on compared to other adoptees that I've talked to in the US.
Okay. So with this experience, did you ever had this feeling of racial isolation or not at all?
Um, no, not really. I mean, there were times when I did see like international students, and they were usually Chinese international students, and I would just have this really weird gut feeling that I did not want to be with them. I did not want to be seen with them, and I think subconsciously I was just like, well, they're just going to lump me in with everyone else in that group because we don't have any differentiating features like white people do. We all have the same texture hair, the same colored eyes, and everything else. So subconsciously, it was like, oh, I don't want to be seen with that. But other than that, I think it was okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so, like topics like white supremacy, racism, or racial fetishism, was it addressed in your environment, or were you aware, or was it something not so much addressed?
So definitely the adoption part was always open to discussion. Not that I did talk a lot about it, as I said before, because I never identified with that part of myself. I found myself being like 100,000% American. I don't even identify myself really as Asian American because Asian American, um, when you see an Asian person, I guess in America, then that's what you call them. But that also implies that you have ties and roots to where you were born, and that's just not me. So it's always felt like a weird word in my mouth. But I think that was really the only thing. We didn't address white supremacy. We didn't really address fetishism, which I had to find out on my own, unfortunately, when I got to college. So college was kind of the awakening phase, and I wish that had been those two had been more addressed as I was growing up.
Okay. And so for racial fetishism, for example, how did you get into this topic, like, and how did you like notice the seriousness of it?
The seriousness of it, I definitely did not do that in high school, even though that did happen a lot. As I said, I was in a predominantly, well, a little bit of diversity, but there were a lot of white people, as I said before, and a lot of the popular kids were white. So I think probably when I was abroad, and I guess in Germany as well. But the feeling has gotten even the feeling has gotten even yeah, even stronger nowadays. But I think when I was in Germany is kind of when I started to realize that, it's not a compliment, as you said before, and it is really racist. But I did not really grasp the gravity of that when I was younger. Yeah.
And so how did you construct yourself racially and culturally? So because I understood like culturally you identify as American, like US American, and but also racially, like how did you like identify yourself?
Yeah, which it's a really good question because I can understand why people automatically look at you and they know you're American and they say, oh, like Asian American. That's also what my mom has always identified me as. um, and I knew that I was always Asian, but I didn't internalize the fact that people, I guess people won't actually, it's more of, I guess when I was in high school, I thought it was like more of a joke. Like when they did call me chink, for example, like I thought it was more of a joke and they didn't really believe that about me. I always knew that I was Asian, so I would always say Chinese, but even when I said Chinese, it didn't really mean that I still identified myself as Asian American, just because it had again that sort of implied understanding that you had ties with where you were born, where your ancestors were from. Yeah.
Okay. But do you sometimes like also identify as white as you grew up in a white space and in a white US American culture? So you could like also identify as white.
I definitely don't identify as white, but I think that I did profit a ton from, um, I guess, white privilege and, like, just, having a white mom and, being raised in a really well-off family, I would say automatically. I definitely profited from that. They gave me a really good education, like, for any of the kids that my mom could have had. She gave me a really good education. And I feel like also, just to lump everyone in, even though that gets on my nerves, I'm going to do it anyway, just for the sake of this explanation. But I think that for Asian Americans, or at least, yeah, Asian Americans, they haven't had to go, especially through the turmoil that African Americans have had to go through. And also Latinos, those communities are especially hit hard by a lot of things in our society. And I feel grateful that, I mean, I guess besides Japanese internment, during World War II, at least, nowadays it still feels like, that Asian Americans can get pretty good jobs. They're not usually thought of as having to be born into poverty, and be raised in poverty and having to get over that hurdle just one after the other. So I think I don't identify myself as white, but I know that I've benefited from the privilege of my family. Yeah.
Okay. And so do you feel like, do you connect to the Chinese culture or do you feel you want to connect to it or not really?
Um, I never felt really any desire to. I remember when, I guess when I was 3 or 4, my mom had said that she wanted to take me to this Chinese learning class. So I just remember one day when we were just sitting there, and it was literally in a classroom setting where you learn languages, which is horrible for a 3-year-old. And I didn't learn anything, and I never went back. And there were a few times when she, tried to she knew the like Asian American community in my town in Arkansas, so she tried to get me to hang out more with them. There was also like this Chinese New Year party where a lot of adoptees would go with their parents in a town, really in a city about 30 minutes away. So, and I understand that because I guess with adoption, you're being taken away from something without your consent, obviously. And I
Mm.
can understand trying to integrate the culture that you came from into it. But I feel like I have the really unpopular opinion as an adoptee that I really don't have any desire to do that. I think with parents, more of like how they were as people, I would be really interested in that. But as far as culture and everything, yeah, it's never been anything that I've truly been interested in. Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
Mhm.
And so what do you think like people needs to be aware of before like proceeding to a transracial adoption? Because sometimes I feel like people they don't want to inform themselves enough before proceeding to it. And also I think some people they feel like they can be able like to raise for example an African descent kid, but actually not, because they have racist ideas, because they don't deconstruct white privilege or anti-blackness and so on. So what do you think like in general people needs to be aware of?
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, to not always treat adoption as this wonderful thing. It is a wonderful thing that at that time was put with another family, and it's my real family. Like, I may have had birth parents, but they're not my real parents because they're not the ones who raised me and
Mm,
shaped who I am today. But I think that parents who knowingly adopt from whatever countries they're adopting from, if they know that their child is going to be of another race, they really need to be prepared to have tough conversations,
mm,
and be willing to step out of that parent role. I know that with parents, they're always used to being right, um, and that and I'm not blaming them either because I'm sure I'll feel the same way as a parent, just always used to being right and knowing what's best for your kid. But
yeah,
I think you really need to give them space so that you can learn from them. Because there's definitely a lot of things that you won't be able to fully understand, and I think you need to accept that fully before even thinking about that, and always striving just to be a really good ally for them because they're going to be the ones that come to you. Hopefully, if you guys have a good relationship, they're going to be the ones that come to you with stuff like that, and yeah, to really just be able to listen to them.
okay. And what do you think the challenges are for transracial adoption?
Yeah, yeah. Like I said before with the other question, just really thinking, not really thinking about how can I be a good ally for my kid? How can I learn something from them? And also just having people think that your adoptive parents are not your real parents. And I guess kind of just throwing around the word abandoned, maybe. I think
Mm,
that word isn't accurate in a lot of cases. And I was actually left at a Buddhist temple. So, I think also going off of, where I was left, I know a lot of people were left on the orphanage steps. So it was obvious that whatever the parents had to go through, they did it knowing that their baby would probably be found, and trying to set them up for that in the best way possible that they could, especially with that, all of that, being illegal at the time. So I think that people need to be aware of how they use that word and maybe even just completely put that word away, just because it really does like flavor your opinion into it, when really it's a very complicated process that surely the parents as well had to go through, with a lot of grief just even before and after.
And so, what do you think like the people have as a misconception about adoption in general?
Um, yeah, as I said before, with thinking that the adopted parents aren't the real parents of the kid, um, misconceptions, like I think just that people are only their adoptive identity and not everything else. I think having these, discussions and really like raising awareness about adoption is really good. That adoptees are more than being adoptees, I guess, and that they have so much more to their person as just human beings, rather than just being like a statistic that that China had made. So yeah, that's another thing. There have been times where people have gossiped about me, and even especially in college when people are already quote unquote adults. Not sure about that, but it's just it's kind of just like, well, people have assumed that I do this and this or I act this and this way because I'm adopted, and
Mm,
without even really getting to know me at all. So and if that's the only thing that they know about me is because I was adopted, they automatically assume, yeah, like she just did that because that was why. So I think that's a really good thing as well. And I think that um, I don't think people understand either that adoptees really have to grow up a lot faster just because of these questions of identity, and even just starting with the fact that your parent looks different than you, and talking with other adoptees about that. You really can't avoid something like that. And as I said before, I haven't had a lot of othered experiences where I felt like I was super, super different, and I'm so grateful for that. But the US is a very big country, and it's very clear that most of the adoptees that I've talked with have not had that. So, yeah.
okay. And have you ever had like an identity crisis or the need like to see maybe a therapist or I don't know, someone that can relate to you like experience or not at all? Or
So I think with the fact of it's really nice to meet people who have suffered through not being able to see other people who look like you in the media and the effects that that
mm,
has had on you. That feels like sort of like a solace for me, just because I realized how big that influence is in all of our lives, especially when we're growing up and we're trying to find out, where do we belong.
mm,
Um, I would say though that I've never had like an identity crisis, and that's been even stronger when I think people would push these assumptions on me and say, well, you look Chinese, so that means you have to go connect with all of those millions of people across the ocean from you, just because you look like them. And that's not always correct. It can be, but for me, I have no memory of that, um, and really, I've just grown up here. I mean, I'm completely Southern, but of course, depending on where other people have been from and what they've learned throughout their lives, what stereotypes they've sort of like internalized about other people, I can see why that would not be accepted by a lot of people after talking about it with me. But yeah, I'm glad I've never really had an identity crisis, and I think this is also what I was thinking about as well, just with languages and belonging. I know I'm getting into like my little thing, but it's really just about like even past like the teenage phase of, wanting to belong somewhere. It's just, I think the feeling is always there, and especially in being an adult. And I know that there have been people who have found that sense of belonging, especially in the countries that they're born, or where their parents grew up, whatever. But I also know that it's been, just from the interviews that I've had, really hard for people to find where they truly belong. And I'm just really happy that I have that. Yeah.
Mm, okay, I see. But do you feel like with when you know the language and so on, do you feel like it can like help to find where do you belong as you can understand the culture and so on? Or
Um, I think that
because for example, in your case, you don't speak Mandarin, you speak English, and maybe this is another factor that as you speak this language and other languages, but not Mandarin, then you just more and more identify with the US American because you couldn't also understand the culture, like the different Chinese cultures and so on, the society, social issues. Because me, for example, when I take my example, like my dad is from Senegal and he speaks Wolof. And when I was not learning that, I was definitely more connected to my Frenchness. But then as I'm learning it and I'm more and more able to understand the society and so on, and also the fact that I realized that I grew up also in a Senegalese culture, then I also identify more and more as Senegalese. So,
mm,
but that's my experience. But I don't know if some people, in your case, for example, or did you notice to other people also?
yeah, that's also really interesting too, because um, I mean, I have, well, first of all, just baseline, like I have no desire to learn Chinese, just because as a language itself, it's not that interesting to me, and it doesn't sound really good to me, and that all sprouts from, the whole identity that I've constructed for myself, not really like caring about that other part. That definitely has a lot to do with it, the majority. But I think as I move into like other spaces in the world, and even outside of Europe, and for me, I feel like it's sort of like a defense mechanism, on some, yeah, in some cases, because I feel like with really any Asian language, and I know that there's a ton of them out there, but I feel like it would just be, there's so many things that I want to say, and it's just like tumbling out of my mouth. So I hope that this is like sort of coherent, but I have heard from a lot of, especially adoptees, that want to reconnect with the part that they want to with where they come from. If that's important to them, then they will learn Chinese. And I've heard as well from those that have done that it's kind of just like, well, first of all, adoption is a really big taboo, and also it's clear that you don't belong there because of your accent, because of your mannerism.
Mm,
Um, and, there's also some things where, like, if I have heard stories before where, if maybe other people were learning it, so if they don't look Asian, but they're learning like um, an Asian language, like Chinese, for example, a white person learns Chinese, then I've heard a lot, or even Korean, Japanese. It's just of course, like the main three I know, that people always talk about. But just with those, I feel like maybe that even like my progress personally with the language wouldn't be acknowledged, because it would be like, well, you look Asian anyway, so you need to speak it perfectly. Like, why aren't you speaking it perfectly? And then the person
mm,
beside you who may be white, they're just, they can't speak as well, but then they get all the praise. And I really hate to say that, because as a language learner myself, like I understand, like wherever you are at one point, it's good to be acknowledged from native speakers. And, so I don't want to belittle that other person either, but there definitely is bias within that as well. So that's also, just hearing about that has also been like discouraging if I ever really wanted to learn another Asian language. And yeah, so that plays a really big role. So um, yeah, but definitely just turning away completely from all of that for now. And probably for a long time. I'm not going to say never because people can change their minds,
Yeah.
but definitely for a long time. It's definitely as well a defense mechanism for me. Maybe even against those people who are just like, yeah, like you need to connect to those people over there, even though we literally don't
Mm,
have anything in common because we've grown up in completely separate worlds. So yeah, there's my long answer to that. Yeah.
okay. And is there anything else you would like to say, or?
Um, I don't think so, but I would like to say that I really appreciated this interview just because I feel that it's hard to have this opinion of not wanting to identify as 1,000%
Mm,
American and not wanting to have anything to do with where I was born and not having any control over that. It's hard to have that one standing opinion because I swear I have never had another adoptee tell me, well, I don't want to have anything to do with that either. Like, I'm not sure why people are still badgering about it to me for the last 20 years. Like, I wish I could meet someone else like that. So
yeah.
it was at least good to talk about it, like in the open with someone else, and yeah, and share maybe a less popular opinion about that.